Welcome to S P A Minar. This is our monthly online gathering for live theater prop professionals and anyone who's interested in stage props. I am Erin Keller. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a SPAM member, and I am the prop director at Hartford Stage here in Hartford, Connecticut. So SPAM, what is SPAM? SPAM is an association of professional prop educators and prop managers from non-for-profit producing organizations with an international communication and support network that shares resources, information, solutions, and techniques, as well as safety information, continuing education, and of course, each other's stocks. We promote the highest professional standards among props artisans and craftspeople, and promote the field of props to potential props professionals while working to establish educational standards for the training of props artisans. So SPAM was formed in 1994 to create a fellowship among properties professionals and to address issues of common importance and to create parity with other production areas. We now have over 150 active members, reaching all the way from Hawaii to Ireland and from Canada all the way down to Florida. So, as with previous SPAM Minars, we are requesting pay what you can donations to help support this programming and our annual grants for early career prop professionals. If you can afford to donate, the link will be in the chat during the session, and we truly appreciate any help that you can give. So tonight, Jessica Rosenlieb is going to take us through tufting, tacking, and trim for theatrical upholstery. She'll share the tools of the trade, materials, resources, and the process for tackling big upholstery projects with all of us. So she'll cover upholstery basics as well as some advanced techniques and give us some ways to save time and money for those quick turnarounds. So Jessica is the current prop shop supervisor at Cleveland Playhouse. Prior to taking on this role, Jess has worked for Great Lakes Theater and their sister theaters, Idaho Shakespeare Festival and Lake Tahoe Theater Festival as their prop master. She's worked at various other theaters and arts organizations throughout Ohio, including Near West Theater and Parade Circle. She's also worked throughout the country at theaters such as Pacific Conservatory of the Performing Arts in California, Stages, St. Louis in Missouri, Central City Opera in Colorado, and completed a professional apprenticeship at Steppenwolf in Chicago. So she has a BA from the University of Northern Colorado in technical theater. And in her spare time, she volunteers for a local pet resource center called Neighborhood Pets and attempts to garden and likes to forage for edible and photogenic mushrooms. I'm your moderator and host for the evening. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat below, and I will pose them to Jessica during the Q&A once she's done with her presentation. Be sure to stick around to the end. We've got a lot of great information to share about upcoming SPAM Minars and other ways that you can interact and learn from our membership. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Jessica, are you ready to rock us?
I hope so.
Right. It's all you.
Awesome. Thanks for that lovely introduction. I don't think I really have anything to add about myself. Besides the fact that when I started working at Cleveland Playhouse, I came in as the soft goods artisan, which is a position that we no longer have here. But the position basically entailed, upholstery, curtains, tablecloths, bedding, all of that kind of stuff. So when I came into the job, I had reupholstered stuff before. I'd worked with fabric, I'd done sewing and stuff, but those 5 years I spent as a soft goods artisan is where I really kind of honed my craft and learned a lot of what I'm going to talk to you guys about tonight. I realized as I was putting this presentation together that I could probably talk for like an hour on each single one of these slides I'm about to show you. So I'm kind of about to do a lot of talking and shove everything in, what would be nice is it'd be great to do a step-by-step of upholstering a couch, but upholstering a couch takes way longer than 50 minutes. So I'm basically breaking this down by steps you can take if you have never reupholstered anything before, to kind of give you the idea of terminology, where you should be, tools you're using, and these steps should kind of like help you navigate a whole different, all different kinds of furniture. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. All right, are we good? Can people see that? I'm gonna go with yes, because I can't see the chat. So tufting, tapping, and trim. So I will say that I don't have any like professional upholstery experience. I am mostly self-taught, and I have been taught by other theater artists. So like there might totally be more professional ways to do things. But the way I've learned to do things has been to facilitate both budget and time that theater puts on us in these type of projects. If you have any questions at all during a thing, put them in the chat. I am more than happy to answer them. And like, if you have experience and you also have some cool like tips, like please leave those in the chat as well. This is how we learn, is by a community and different people sharing what they've learned. What works well for me may not work well for someone else. So like, I totally encourage you guys to also add to the conversation as well in the chat. The other thing I will shout out is if you live somewhere where you are lucky enough to have a local fabric and or upholstery store, I highly encourage that you get real friendly with them. They're an excellent resource. My local store here is called Schindler's Fabrics. It is a woman-owned, family-run business, and it is amazing. She gives me recommendations. She lets me come in when the store's not open. If they don't have what I need, she can give me the like fabric choices that she knows will like come in fast enough for our turnaround times. And she lets me bring my own scissors so I can just like go swatch myself, which is awesome. Joann's has a lot of improvement in the swatching area, especially for upholstered fabric. So that's my shout out for local businesses. See what's around you locally. So the first step when you are approaching a project for a fabric project is research. And one of the most preliminary things you can look at is like the era or time that you are in. I like to collect a bunch of different types of furniture, like catalogs are great. You want to be thinking about like, what type of fabric would be appropriate for this time period? What would the stuffing be? Would it have springs? What type of trim would it have used? Would it have tufting? Like what size buttons would it have? I check out furniture all the time. Like I'm walking around, I'm like, ooh, look at that cool booth in that restaurant. Or like, oh, wow, look at like grandma's furniture. Like I'm gonna ask her where she got that from and when. It's really, you look at like what type of, trim and stuff they used. So I'm always, there's stuff in museums that are good. But you also have to make, understand that the designer may have a strong vision, which doesn't fit in necessarily with what might be historically accurate. So you kind of work with that to make sure you can hopefully provide both, but also serve the design. I like to look at primary resources as possible. Museums often have furniture, movies that are filmed in your time era, not ones that are like set in the time period. I like to get catalogs. So like one of these pictures here, I think is like a Sears catalog from like the 1970s. That is like awesome. It's like what they thought was super amazing at that time. So those are great resources. I kind of collect my own little library of those. Fabric choices. Obviously work closely with your designer. Your designer may have a very, very specific vision of what you want, or your designer may have like I just want something that has flowers on it. And you need to kind of take whatever they give you and run with it and try to make the most appropriate choices. If your designer is not local, you can try to send pictures, but very ideally, I recommend sending swatches in the mail because color doesn't always relate very well in photos, especially when you're looking at stuff like velvets. Designers can make a much better choice if they have a swatch in their hand. I like to take my designer's fabric swatching with me if they're available or if they're in town for design presentations or anything. Discourage garment fabric choices. I know sometimes designers are like, oh, well, this plaid is just perfect for what I want, but it's actually like a knit. Those are going to give you not a great final product. I know like the designer may be like, oh, it's perfect. It's just going to be too lightweight. If it has any stretch in it, it's going to make your life a nightmare. So I know sometimes they can really push for it. I've done it before, and I could say that like my project would have turned out better and looked more accurate if it had been done in actual upholstery fabric. Again, keep in mind era and period, but be flexible to design, style, and cost. Cost is a big one. Upholstery fabric can be very expensive. You know, it can start at $20 a yard. It can run into $100 a yard or more. So you have to be very cognizant of that while you are shopping for fabric. And then keep in mind how your fabric will appear on stage. Usually white is not a great choice unless the designer and the lighting designer, everybody's on the same page about like, there's going to be white on stage. If you pick a fabric with like a very, very small pattern or like a very faint pinstripe, that's just not going to read. And maybe that's fine. Maybe that's what you want. But you need to kind of keep that in mind as you're shopping. The other thing to keep in mind too is I like to talk to the costume designers in the costume shop and be like, hey, we're doing a big red sofa. Is anybody wearing a big red dress that's sitting on that sofa? That's usually a problem and something you want to navigate before you buy all the fabric and start upholstering. Okay, fabric estimation for a piece. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen these kind of yardage charts on the internet. To be honest, I find these charts fairly accurate. You need to pay attention to the size of your sofa because if your sofa is 5 feet, it's obviously going to be a lot different than if it's an 8-foot sofa. But many of these charts do list length of sofa. And I usually cross-reference a couple. And then I like to buy at least a yard extra if I have the money for it, just to make sure I have enough. But it's a great place to start, and it's a great place to cross-reference yourself if you do all the handwork and you're like, I don't know if this is right. You can also take your own measurements with a soft tape measure. You know, I measure each individual piece and then I add several inches on either side when I'm writing it down. You can also use the fabric coming off of your furniture as an estimate as well. One of the things you want to keep in mind is pattern size and centering. If you can look at this repeat guidelines down here, this is very helpful. So if you're using a fabric that has a large flower motif and you want to make sure you're centering that flower motif, you know, if it's above a 20-inch pattern repeat, you're going to want to add on at least 25% to your estimate so that you can make sure that you are going to be able to center your patterns, you know, and having the waist or cut off. As you can see in this other picture, you can use a piece of paper with a scale rule, or you can freehand it, or you can use grid paper to help you visualize how different pieces of fabric are going to fit on your bolt of fabric, your length of fabric. Don't forget fabric estimations for piping and box cushions. We'll talk about those both a little bit later. And luckily in theater that if you need to cheat, if you can't afford a bunch of the really expensive fabric, what's happened to me before is the perfect fabric, there's not enough yardage. Depending on how, you know, where, you know, if you're in a proscenium or the way your furniture sits on stage, you can like cheat by using a different, cheaper fabric on the back. You can also use a different, cheaper fabric on the bottom of the box cushions. If I do that, I do like to add a little strip of the real fabric right on front because you can usually see the upturn of that fabric. But yeah, if you're lucky enough and it's set right on stage, you can sometimes get away with that. Okay, so how do I reupholster something? Upholstery is a puzzle. If you pay attention to how you take it apart, you can put it back together. And I always say that upholstery is kind of one of those things that, like, if you do it right, no one's going to really notice, right? It's just going to be upholstered furniture on the stage. If you do it wrong, it's noticeable. People pick up on it really quickly. So, you know, no pressure. But it tends to be something that, like, if you do it perfectly, no one's going to see, like, notice, which is what we want as prop people quite a bit of the time. So when I started doing a lot of reupholstery and deupholstery, I would take a ton of pictures of my piece of furniture before I took anything off. So I would take pictures of all of the sides, I'd take pictures of the back, I would do close-ups if there was like a tricky part where like the piping was like going into a seam or something. And then I continued to take pictures as I started taking things apart. Usually the way you're going to take it apart is going to be the opposite of the way you're going to put it back together. So most always you're going to start with the very back of the piece of furniture. Then you'll move around to the outside arms of the furniture. And then you'll move into the inside arms and inside back, usually. And then you take the box cushion off and do that separately. So as you start taking the back off, you can take pictures of like, oh, this looks like it was hand sewn down the back. Or, oh, they used tacking strip at the top to give it a nice, like, turned edge. You know, so pay attention not only to what order you take things off in, but like, how is it attached? Hand sewn, machine sewn, staples, tack strip, glue. Of course, if you're taking apart a piece that's already been reupholstered by a theatrical person, it might not be correct, but it is good to look for hints. And that's going to tell you how to put it back together. And as you're taking stuff off, I keep each and every single piece that comes off and I label it. As you can see in the bottom right corner, this is the way I label fabric as it's coming off a piece of furniture. So right inside right arm, and then I have an arrow indicating which way is up. You may think you're going to remember, but then you're not. So I like to make it as clear as possible. You can use whatever terminology you want, as long as you understand it and you're going to remember what it means later. These are the tools I generally use for taking stuff apart. It's just a lot of staple pulling for the most part, and ripping fabric off, cutting fabric out. To save time, you don't always have to take 100% of the staples out all the time, but the more you take out, the easier your life is going to be when you move into the reupholstery project. I also recommend wearing a dust mask while you're doing this. Old furniture especially can get pretty musty and dusty. If you find any money in it, it is yours. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. I've also found cocktail shrimp tails in something I was taking apart. So like, I don't know. I'm imagining like what party that person was sitting at, like shoving shrimp tails into the couch. Anyway, so once you've got all your fabric taken off and folded away nicely, when your piece of furniture is as naked as it's going to be, this is where you can repair, you can replace. If you know the sofa is going to get danced on a bunch, you might need to add extra legs, you might need to add plywood. If any of the webbing's busted, you might need to replace that. But as you'll notice in here, I almost never take anything down to the raw wood. I usually leave as much of the original furniture as I can and reuse it. If you are reupholstering something for professional, if you're professionally upholstering something for someone, you would probably want to take it all off and redo it, but we're not. We're doing it for theater. So yeah, I try to leave as much as possible unless it's like super nasty, unless it's broken. And that helps keep the original character of the piece as well. I also vacuum really well at this stage. And yeah, you usually don't need to strip down furniture all the way. Pattern cutting. Okay, so this is the part where you take your patterns that you have lovingly set aside and labeled, and you lay them out on your new fabric and you cut them out. I give myself at least 3 inches all the way around and 6 inches on the bottom. If you have enough fabric, I encourage more. It's going to be the fabric that you're going to be pulling on to get tension correctly. It's going to give you the wiggle room to get your pattern like perfectly where you want it on the piece. As you see, I've included these pictures here. This is where you want to think about where your pattern is going to lie. So if you have a stripe, you want to think about how that stripe runs through the entire piece, right? You want it to come down the back, through the box cushion, and down the front. Same with this red chair here. Often your pattern, like if you have a big medallion or something that you want centered on the piece, usually that's actually not going to be exactly centered. It's probably going to be centered side to side, but you usually move it up a little bit to be on like the more prominent part of the chair. So the pattern actually might not be centered. It might be just like usually higher than normal, so like rest in like the focal point of the piece of furniture. I use a lot of metal rulers. I use soft tape measures. I use pins. You can use tailor's chalk. I usually use Sharpie, honestly. Like you can do a test. It almost never bleeds through upholstery fabric. It's just easier for me to see. It doesn't rub off. And obviously fabric scissors. Let's see, we talked about pattern centering. Oh, the last thing is if you're working with something that has a nap, like velvet, right? So if you run your hand one way, it's smooth, and run your hand the other way, it's kind of rough. Nap direction is really, really important. Sometimes the shade of the color can change like several degrees based on which way your nap is facing. So you really need to be cognizant of which way that nap is facing, and it's facing the same way throughout the entire piece of furniture. I label the pieces I'm cutting out the exact same way I labeled the old piece, so that once I have everything set aside, you know, I'm ready to go upholster the piece of furniture. Okay, reupholster, right? Draw the rest of the owl. This is like the part that most people get excited about, and it is my favorite part as well. You do have to do a lot of work to get to this point, but it is the most exciting part for me. We can talk about staple guns a little bit. I highly, highly encourage you to use pneumatic guns. True upholstery staplers do not have safeties, just because you're sometimes getting into weird areas, and a safety can be really annoying to like try to like press down to like get into your annoying area. Some of these guns have extended like long noses, which can be really nice if you're trying to get into deep areas. Sure Bond, I think, makes a cheap-ish gun that we use a lot that I like because it takes T50s. And T50s are nice because you can just go to the store and buy them. You don't have to order them if you run out of your like fancy upholstery staplers. You really want to be cognizant of using the right length of staples. Definitely don't want to use too long, because that's going to start like breaking the furniture and breaking down the wood, which is not what you want to use. I have used hand staplers. You really don't want to do that. You're going to really hate your life if you're doing anything more than like a dining room seat. And I have also used electric staplers. They're not great. I don't suggest them. Pneumatic is really, if you had to invest in one piece of equipment to do your upholstery work, I would recommend getting a pneumatic staple gun. Sewing machines you're going to use a lot in upholstery. I have certainly done upholstery on a domestic machine. It's worked. It can be a struggle. You really do want to use a thicker thread than you use for garments, and sometimes domestic machines are not as happy using those. And they're not as happy going through like 6 layers of upholstery weight fabric, but I've done it. You can do it too. But if you can, getting an industrial machine is amazing. And on top of that, getting an industrial walking foot machine will like blow your mind and up your game so much. It sews through really thick fabric like butter. It sews through like 6 layers of fabric like butter. That's what I use primarily. That's what we have in our shop. That's like kind of a more expensive like investment, but it will really, really up your game if you can get your hands on one of these. This little picture here is upholstery pins. They're thicker than normal pins, so they don't bend when you're pulling stuff all over the place. These are great when you're trying to like center a pattern or like, you know, pin some things to hand sew. I do a lot of hand sewing personally. I like it better than tack strip. But I know people who also really like using this, this tack strip here. So in this picture, so this circle here is cardboard tack strip. This stuff is great. I use this a lot. You can use it on the back to flip over and create really sharp edges on the top. You can use it when you're running piping along like the bottom of a piece of furniture to make the piping like run really evenly and not have divots from where the staples are. And you can buy it by the roll. I've also honestly made it in a pinch with like the back of like a notebook pad or something. This metal tack strip, some people like to use to do edges and backs of their upholstery. It's not for me. I prefer to hand sew, but some people like it. Check it out. It might be for you. It might not be for you. So one of the biggest issues I see with new upholsterers is they don't get stuff tight enough. They're afraid to really kind of pull it and get it like really, really tight. And that's kind of one of the hallmarks of like some bad upholstery. So what I encourage people to do, especially if you're working with a pattern, is get your pattern where you like it, tack, top, sides, bottom. And then you're going to start working from the middle outwards around. You're going to take out staples. This is one of like the great advice I got from Tom Fiocchi. There's no shame in taking out staples. Sometimes once you like pull everything down, your original staples are like not in the right place anymore. You're going to take those out. Totally normal part of the process. Yeah, so that's probably all I have about time for to talk about. But again, this is where you're going to start thinking about how did I take this apart? Now I'm going to do the reverse to put it back together. Yeah. Okay, springs and things. Guys, I'm going to be honest. I have never once resprung a couch. If the couch springs are messed up, I'm just going to slap plywood on top of that puppy. I don't have time to deal with it. And honestly, actors like firmer furniture, especially if they're singing, but like if they're standing on it, even just sitting, they don't want to be eaten by a couch. They want to be able to like actor perch on it and feel supported. So springs, especially old springs, don't offer that type of support. So I have cut pieces of plywood that go on the bottoms of furniture that just lift all those springs up. Or I have also put plywood here right under the box cushions, and you can upholster over it or just paint it if it's hidden by the box cushions. And this is one of those things, if you have time and you want to learn how to respring something, that's awesome, go do it. But this is one of those things I totally like theater cheat on, and I'm like, I'm just going to fix this with wood. Webbing is one of these things that I see worn out on old furniture a lot. It's usually burlap, and it usually gets worn out quite frequently. They still make burlap, and they also make kind of this new like nylon webbing. They're color coded, so there's usually a seat webbing and there's a back webbing. The seat webbing is a lot stronger. You never want to use back webbing on the seat. And color coding is not universal. You really need to check with your manufacturer to see which is which. Awkwardly, thanks. There is a way to put webbing on, and this is again, like if there was webbing on it, check it out. You're going to want to replicate that. But there are ways to stretch webbing onto fabric in an appropriate way so it's tight. I don't have time to talk about that, but there are plenty of YouTube videos talking about how to do exactly that. Webbing is one of the most common things I replace when I'm taking apart a piece of furniture. Okay, upholstery foam. I was researching upholstery foam for this presentation because I wanted to make sure that my terminology was correct. And then I found out that the terminology for upholstery foam is like totally messed up. It's not universal. Sometimes people use high density to talk about the quality and longevity of foam. Sometimes they use high density to talk about the actual density and how far foam compresses. So you really just need to do your research on your specific type of foam. I always buy my foam from my upholsterer. So like, I'm just like, give me the dense foam. And they're like, cool, we got you. But for theater, like I was talking about plywood and actors liking to have firm seats, really usually you always just want to get the densest foam you can afford. Upholstery foam is one of those things that's gotten crazy expensive recently because of the supply chain disruptions. So that's something you should really look into when you're pricing out your project in the beginning is how much do I need? How much does it cost? Because it can be a lot. It can be more than your fabric is. These are some foam cutting tools I like to use. I guess Bosch stopped making this, but this was a specific upholstery cutting tool, which is amazing. I think there's others out there, but they're pretty expensive. This right here is actually a turkey carver. You can almost always find one of these at a thrift store. They work pretty well. One of the things I do want to say about cutting foam is you might be like, oh, this is just like underneath a bunch of fabric and batting. It doesn't really matter if it's a little bit wonky. That is false. Once you get everything super tight and like super clean, if you've cut a wonky line, you're going to see it. So you really want to take care to get these lines as clean and as crisp and as straight as you can, because you will see it on the final project if it's weird. The other thing I like to do is if, say, I'm replacing some cushions on an old Victorian sofa because the old spring ones have completely fallen apart. I don't want to take just like a square box and stick it on that sofa because those old sofas are like rounded and like sexy. So you can chamfer the size of your foam, or like you can shape the foam to give you shapes that you want to see in your piece of furniture. So you can do that by just cutting off the edge. You can also use rasps or blades to give yourself nice dome shapes, which sometimes you need instead of just having a square. If you're doing a 1950s sofa, a square might be exactly what you want. And if you need to glue foam together, I like 3M 74. It's a contact adhesive. It sticks together foam really well. Again, just read the instructions and use it as a contact adhesive so that it works correctly. Okay, padding. So these are the most common types of padding I run into when I'm taking apart a piece of furniture. Straw is fairly common on older vintage furniture, as is horsehair. Also, I've seen wool. Apparently, like English Victorian people used seaweed sometimes, like dried seaweed. I don't know. What you can usually still buy today, like you can probably buy horsehair. I don't know. I've never looked. You can probably
no,
buy.
we don't want to do that.
Deb, I can hear you. So this is cotton batting and this is polyester or poly batting. These are the two that you can still find fairly frequently in like your local fabric store or even Joann's. And really think about what type of batting would be on the piece of foam, the piece of furniture that you're reupholstering, because it will change the look of it when you pick like which one you want to use. So like if you're taking apart an old sofa and it has cotton batting, I highly recommend that you put cotton batting back on it. If it's a modern piece, use the synthetic stuff. The loft is just very different in these two. So it's going to change just like the skin of the way that the furniture looks like. So you really want to think about that. If you need to pull out horsehair or straw, I recommend using cotton batting. It's just denser and it's less fluffy. If you can't find cotton batting, you can deply this so it's a little bit less fluffy. But batting is one of the other things I semi-regularly change when I'm taking apart a piece of furniture because it's gotten kind of gross or nasty or fallen apart. If you are putting on new batting and it's kind of fighting you a little bit, I often take Super 77 spray and I just spray it and then stick it on. And that's not going to hold it forever, but it's at least going to hold it in place enough for you to get your fabric on there and like get in there. Okay, box cushions. Guys, box cushions are my nemesis. I hate them. I was going through photos. I was like, I don't have any good photos of box cushions I've made because I always like hated all of them. That being said, I've learned a lot about how to make them. There are a bunch of good tutorials that are like 30 minutes long about how to do a box cushion. So I'm not really going to talk about how to make one. You can find much better tutorials online, but I'm going to give you a couple tricks that I've learned that has helped me as a theatrical upholsterer. Box cushions, usually the ones I am doing have piping in them, which is this piping that's running around the corner here, but they do come in different flavors, as you can see down here, as like no welt, a baseball stitch, a mattress stitch, a French seam, or a welt or slash piping. And that's something that you should look in your research, like what kind of box cushion would this be? Or what was on this when I took it apart? That's probably what you should do when you put it back on, unless you're changing eras. I measure and cut my box cushion slightly smaller than the cushion itself, so I guarantee a very tight fit. When I started making these, I was making them exactly to size, and they always ended up just being a little bit too loose. So yeah, I make them slightly smaller, and that makes sure that they're nice and tight. As you're sewing, you might be going through a lot of different layers of fabric, sometimes up to 6 if you're going over a seam. Pin the crap out of it while you're sewing it. I was talking to a friend who was also giving me the tip about taking just a normal paper stapler and taping or stapling your seams so that you can sew along it, or they also make a tape. I've never used the staple or the tape method, but it's worth looking into. One of the biggest problems I have with sewing these is fabric drift as you're pushing it through the machine. And it's really important where your corners line up. So if your fabric's drifting, your corners are not going to line up and it's not going to look great. So that's one of the most important things. So you really want to make sure your fabric is not moving while you're feeding it through the machine. You can use like a little carrot snip mark to mark where your corners and your middles are to ensure that everything is lining up the way it should be as you're sewing. You usually do not need a zipper. Zippers are for people who are gonna like take it home and spill wine on it and like need to wash it. We're just gonna put it on stage and like spill fake wine on it and then like blot it up with paper towels. I mean, if you like know that it's going to get a lot of liquid on it or blood or something, you probably want to make a game plan for that on how to wash stuff. But if you need to save time, not putting in a zipper is somewhere you can do it. I just hand stitch the cushions in. Another tip I learned is since you're making your piece so tight, sometimes getting your like batting covered cushion in there can be kind of a fight. You can wrap it in a trash bag and let all the air out or suck all the air out with a vacuum. And then you can slide it into the cover and then you can just rip out the trash bag. So that has saved me many fights in the past. But like I said, if you need a tutorial, there's several out there. I'll give resources at the end of this presentation. Okay. Piping, welting, and cording, these are all words for the same thing, which is this kind of rope type decoration that is found on quite a bit of furniture. Probably 80 to 90% of furniture I've worked on has this. It comes in different sizes. You can see here, we carry 2 in the shop. There are more than that, but size does matter for periods. So look at your research and be like, is it tiny little baby piping or is it like big chunky piping? Typically in professional upholstery, piping is cut on a bias, which is going at a 45-degree angle to your fabric. And this is done so that it turns and curves better. Your seams are going to be a little bit less chunky, and it wears better. You don't have to do this. If you are like, don't have time, or you don't have very much excess fabric and you can only cut like straight lines, that's cool. Do it. It's kind of just like a fancy little extra step you can take if you have the time. And there's various ways to cut it at an angle, some really clever ones. There's some like crazy infinity scarf one that like has no angles. I don't know. It's crazy. They also make a product like this that is basically like piping you don't have to make. It works for some projects. Not all periods would this work for, but like if you're doing kind of a fun, floofy musical theater piece and, you know, it's kind of not historical or whatever, that kind of stuff would work to save you time so you don't have to make it, because you might end up for a sofa make like, I don't know, tons of yards, 20 plus yards of piping. You don't always want to do that. There are special piping feet for machines that have like a little divot in the foot that holds your pipe in place while you're sewing. If you don't have one of those, a zipper foot will work fine. Yeah. And just the other tip I have for piping and cording is if like you're making a box cushion and you need to do an angle, totally give it like this little snip, snip, snip on its tail. It will help ease your piping a lot easier. Okay, finishing touches. So again, you'll kind of like when you're looking at your research and your piece of furniture, you're going to be looking at how they hid all of those staples they used, right? This stuff over here is usually called GIMP. There is a ton of different types of GIMP out there. You know, you might want to pick a GIMP that really hides in with the fabric of the furniture you're using. You might want to use a GIMP that contrasts with your fabric, and that's just kind of a stylistic choice. They also, you know, they come in different like braids and like doubles and crazy stuff. So look around. Another one that we see quite often is these decorative nails, which also come in a big variety of patterns. You can also find big ones. This right here is like a decorative nail like strip. So like most of these are fake, and then every once in a while there's one with a hole in it where you would put in one of these like tacks to actually hold it in place. These work okay. I tend to find it hard to get them as tight as I would really like them to be, especially if you're working with a used piece of furniture that is kind of like has holes in the wood already and your nails don't want to stick. But that works. You know, you can also like do them individually. Yeah, and then this last picture here is cambric or dust cover. This is the fabric that is usually on the bottoms of furniture. It's really quick to put on, guys, and it takes your upholstery to like level 11, right? It's just like, look at this professional thing I did, and cambric is super cheap. So I don't see a reason not to do it. And then plus in some theaters, you can actually like see under the fabric, so it just looks better. Okay. This is a little bit, we don't have a ton of time to talk about this, unfortunately, but we will talk a little bit about channeling. So channeling is this type of upholstery you see that has these deep channels running through the fabric. This method here, this was a banquette I made that for a Chinese buffet for, can't remember the show off the top of my head. But the way I made this banquette is I took a flat piece of back fabric and I, you know, measured the foam piece, like the side, the top and the side, and I sewed pockets. And then I shoved foam in these pockets, and then I attached it to the back here. This method works really well if you're doing something that's just flat, or it's kind of like, you know, two-dimensional, not if you have a crazy like rolled chair that's going everywhere. You know, or like a headboard or something like this. This is a really good method for that. This picture, you know, you see channeling in chairs often. Sometimes I've been able to just like start in the middle, put a staple, like roll it around. And you can use like a piece of like string and stick it and dig it into the channel, like the deep channel. And sometimes it gets completely hidden and you can literally staple it on the top and the bottom. That's going to hold your channel in place. That works well for some pieces of furniture, not for others. Sometimes when they get into crazy channeled shapes, there's quite a bit of pattern making that's involved. And you might need to look at the piece that came off and pattern off of it. Sometimes people sew in that string so they can really tighten in their channeling. Okay, tufting, guys, I love tufting. It's my favorite thing to do. And I've been very fortunate that I've gotten quite a few tufting projects to work for, to do in my career. So tufting is basically when objects or when a piece of furniture has all of these buttons in it. The size of the button is informed by the period you're doing. You know, the 1950s and 60s have these like huge honking buttons that actually weren't very deeply tufted. They just kind of like sat on the, you know, the back of the furniture. Other pieces of furniture, you know, the button is quite small. It's like the size of a dime. So look at your research, look at what came off of your furniture. I like to get my buttons covered at my upholstery store. That saves me a ton of time. It does not save me money. It's like $1.40 a button. So like this Chesterfield was something like 100 buttons. So that adds up, but it saved me like, I don't know, 4 hours of making buttons. You can also buy these kits where you can cover buttons yourself. It is time consuming, but it will save you money. I realize this picture does not give a good sense of scale, but these are like 12-inch long needles. They're tufting needles, and this is tufting twine. It's very strong. I like to tuft by hand using these long needles and this twine. There is a tufting knot. It's a slip knot. And I'm not going to teach you how to do it here, but if you look up a tufting knot or a slip knot, you will learn how to do it. This is amazing because it lets you adjust your tightness as you go. I usually start in the middle of a piece and then I start working my way out on either side. You don't want to attach your fabric when you're tufting something, because you're going to lose a lot of fabric as you tuft in, and your fabric gets all like diamondy and crazy. To be honest, it is a lot of just like futzing to get your fabric to line up where you want it to. You might have to cut off a button and try again. Something I did forget to mention as a time-saving feature on this chair, you can see this yellow fabric. I'm actually upholstering over the front of this chair because I didn't have a lot of time, so I didn't take it all off. I left on what I could. I just popped off all of the buttons in here and I'm just tufting right over it. It actually works out really well because I don't have to, you know, my shape is already there. I just need to lay right on top of it. So that's a good way to save time if you need to. A person I was talking to recently who does professional upholstering mentioned these prong buttons. I've never used them. She swears by them. So like, I'm gonna check it out. Maybe you should too. Okay, I've got a couple more minutes left. So we're running right on time. So I want to talk a little bit about changing eras of furniture. So something, this is a weird piece of furniture. I think it's probably theatrically built, but something you can do if you're like, man, we really need a 1950s sofa, but we can't find one. Like, look at the bones of furniture. You know, is it really straight angled and like flat line, like straight lines, or is it like super curvy? Because if the bones of a piece of furniture match the era you're going for, you can change the era it is in with your upholstery. So you can see like, this was the before. This is not upholstery fabric, so you can see some of the problems already. But what I mainly want to talk about is like, you see there's like a piping edge here. You see there's a skirt on it. It's like a floofy dressing room type chaise. And just by like eliminating this piping, right, and taking off the skirt, it's a completely different piece of furniture you're going to find in a completely different room. This is one of the favorite projects I've ever worked on. This is what I'm talking about, looking at the bones of a piece of furniture. This sofa is from Crate and Barrel. It's like super boring, super basic, but its shape is very reminiscent of like a 1950s sofa. So what I did to turn it into a 1950s sofa is add a box cushion. So luckily when I took this cushion off here, there was just a piece of foam just like chilling there. I was like, sweet, it's gonna be a box cushion. And I added buttons here, some tufting, as you can see, not super tight and big buttons to like, I was watching a lot of Mad Men at the time, so it's super into this. There was also different legs on this sofa. We put on tapered legs. So you can see how something was super modern, but we turned it into something that was a different era. So like that is the power of that upholstery can have. It can take a piece of furniture you have and turn it into something else completely. Whew. Okay, guys, we're at the end. I just talked a lot. Resources. There are several books out there. I'm not going to go through all of these. You can kind of like come back to these when this comes out on YouTube. There are some great YouTube channels I like though. Fabric Farm Interiors, the Funky Little Chair particularly is great. They're an upholstery teaching site in maybe Michigan, I think. I might be wrong. Sorry, Funky Little Chair. They have a great Instagram and Facebook page and YouTube that do demos on all different kinds of stuff. And also Sailrite was a company that actually started making sails for sailboats. And then they did marine, and then they started getting into all different kinds of fabric and upholstery. They also have some really great tutorials if you need to look up how to do the thing. Oh my God. Okay, it's over, guys. We made it. I see there's a lot of chat, so I'm excited to see what questions we have. I'm going to stop sharing.
All right, we've got questions.
Hey.
All right, are you ready? All right.
I'm ready.
All right, so a question about thread and sort of shelf life. Do you find that thread and fabric have a bit of a shelf life, and how do you sort of take that into account when you're working on upholstery?
That's a great question. Thread 100% has a shelf life. Like, don't take that tin of thread grandma gave you and put it in your sewing machine like you're going to be super sad. I always try to have new-ish thread within the last couple of years. Fabric is that's a good point. You know, depending on how fabric is stored, fabric can definitely dry rot. But sometimes you can find great bolts of vintage fabric that are sturdier, but you really have to take it case by case and just like check it out, see if you think it's going to be sturdy enough. Luckily, we don't usually, you know, we just need it to make through a run of a show. We don't need it to last for 10 years in someone's apartment. So yes, it matters.
Do you have any favorite like sources for getting those vintage catalogs that you talked about?
I look for them anytime I'm in a used bookstore or even antique stores. They're usually really reasonably priced because like, who would want those except for me? But yeah, used bookstores, same with upholstery books, guys. You can find those in used bookstores or antique stores as well.
Nice. So question, when you were talking about like how you might have a pattern that you want centered, but not quite in that center, are there any like tips and tricks for how to help cut that out? Like, are there any sort of shortcuts that you use, or is it just kind of like hold it up? Yeah.
Yeah, so part of that is experience. You know, generally I kind of use the guideline of like, if you're doing like the center back of a chair, you're probably going to want your pattern to be in like the top third. It's really more like 3/5 of it. You know, and if you have the fabric, if you bought a little bit of extra fabric, like give yourself like some more wiggle room when you cut out your pattern, so that when you get it on the piece, you can really kind of move it and like look and see like where, you know, where it looks the best for that piece of furniture.
Awesome. So any suggestions on how to stabilize the wood if that item's been upholstered a lot and where you want to put those staples is just kind of Swiss cheese?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. I have, when you have had really bad Swiss cheese before, and depending on the location, I have had success putting in Luan. Again, depending on where it is, you can kind of add yourself or Luan, or if like you have it like a little piece of hardwood, to just give yourself a fresher surface to go in. I've also kind of tried like the glue and sawdust, like fill it in. That doesn't work as well for like the staple part. So if you can have the time and it works, like I try to replace that, but sometimes I'm just gonna like roll with it.
Yeah, awesome. So is there a good way that you found to like revive or reuse foam, especially knowing that like it's gotten so expensive?
That's a really great question. I don't know, if I have not personally heard of a way to revive foam. Something I have done in the past is like if foam is looking a bit rough, but I'm like, don't have a ton of time, is I will put maybe multiple layers of batting on top of it. And it's like, if I was doing this for like an actual person, like that's bad. But we're doing it for theater. So like, okay, this is like kind of falling apart and I don't have time, or I don't have the foam or budget. I'm just going to like support it and supplement it with batting. And give it a little hug and like tuck it in with some fabric. Nice. And send it on its way.
Awesome. So when it comes to upholstery fabric, do you ever pre-wash it, or do you just use it straight off the roll?
I never pre-wash it. I can see like if you're doing this for a household and they're going to be washing it, you would want to. If you're like box cushions, if you knew you're going to be spilling wine on every night and might need to wash them, pre-wash it. You're going to want to serge all your edges. I'm a big fan of Scotchgard. Actually, I try to put Scotchgard in anything I make, just spray it a bunch of times to try to repel that kind of stuff, but I don't bother with washing. Actually, a lot of those fabrics are not washable. They're dry cleanable. It's just not worth the hassle.
So speaking of things that you're sort of putting on your fabrics, do you ever use any flame retardant on your furniture?
Great question. I do not, because our state does not have those requirements. I know that Roscoe in particular does have flame retardants for fabrics. That's actually like, I have flame retarded like blacks and stuff for a space. So it's the same thing. Test a sample, spray it on, follow the manufacturer's instructions. But there are some places that would require that. So that's a great question. You'd probably want to do that back and front before you cut out your fabric, is my guess.
Yep, can confirm from a state that requires it. So a question about tufting.
Yes.
So do you ever sew in the diamond pattern before tufting?
I do not. There is some furniture does do that. If you notice it, I have actually never reupholstered a piece that has pre-sewn and all of that pattern stuff. To me, like that is too fiddly. That is a ton of time that I don't usually have. And usually diamond tufting, when it's deep enough, it's not just like sewn, it's like overlapping itself. So if you're doing all that work to sew it, it's gonna just disappear in the deep diamond tufting.
Mm-hmm. So any suggestions when you're stapling new fabric, when there's all of those staple holes and tack holes? I know you mentioned putting some glue on up there, but if it's not to the point where you need to cover it, is there anything else that you do to kind of help just make the surface a little bit better?
Well, I know I just saw that Cassie said resin and wood shavings, which sounds amazing, and I'm going to try that. Trying to think of anything else. Like if I'm doing like the decorative tacks, and usually the corners are the worst because that's where you always exactly have two tacks. Sometimes I will put a staple there and then put a tack on top because it's fine. And a staple is going to hold it better than the one tack is going to.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jessica. That was so great. I can't wait to get in there and get some upholstering. This looks super fun, super awesome. So yes, thank you so much. So much fun.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I had a great time. I hope I didn't information dump on you too hard, and maybe there's some more advanced stuff we can talk about later if there is interest. So
absolutely. I think it would be super cool if we had an advanced, like a deep dive on tufting, since you're so into it.
Yeah.
Great. All right. So I promised you more information. So get those Sharpies ready and mark your calendars, because I'm going to tell you all about our next Spaminar. So September 19th, Kirsten Harrison, author of the Fake Food Cookbook, will give us all the details on making some great fake food. And this Spaminar, make sure you tune in, because this is going to feature our second book giveaway, where one lucky attendee is going to win a copy of Kirsten's book, which is the Fake Food Cookbook. It's a great book. It's a great resource to have. You are not going to want to miss your chance to get this book. Then October 17th, just in time for Halloween, Jen McClure, the properties master for Yale Repertory Theater, is going to join us again to talk about stage blood. She is the master. You guys are going to love this one. And then finally, on November 14th, we're going to wrap up season 1 of Spaminars with Larry Heyman, the assistant professor in properties design and fabrication at OCU School of Theater. He's going to come back, rejoin us to talk all about set dressing and how it can really make or break a set. It's those details that really, really matter, guys. We're also going to have Jay Lasnik, the chair of SPAM's education committee here, with us to do a season 1 wrap up and give us a little sneak peek at season 2, which is coming to your screens on January 2022. So if there's anything that you guys want to see us talk about in season 2, let us know. We've got a feedback survey that's going to be coming to your inboxes. So let us know. What do you want to hear about? Prof people are sort of jack of all trades. So yeah, just let us know. So some of you are probably wondering, how do I become a member of this awesome group SPAM? Well, if you're a working prop manager, director, supervisor, master, or some similar title in a nonprofit theater or opera company, or an educator who teaches props classes or prepares students for a career in props, we are interested in having you join SPAM. So please send our membership committee an email for more information. The email address is membership@propmanagers.org. I want to make sure that's in the chat too, so that you guys have that information as well. Membership@propmanagers.org. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Links are in the chat. Go ahead and tag us in the pictures that you've done of your upholstery. If you're super proud of some button tufting that you've done, you want Jess to see it, tag us on Instagram. Check us out on YouTube and hook up for some great advice on Facebook. So Spaminar is produced by the Society of Props Artists and Managers, with special thanks to SPAM members Patrick Drone, the properties director and lecturer at the University of Michigan; Ben Homan, properties director at the Utah Shakespeare Festival in Cedar City, Utah; Stacy Horn Harper, properties master at Salem State University in Salem, Massachusetts; Nikki Kulas, the props master at First Stage in Milwaukee, Wisconsin; Jay Lasnik, property supervisor at Penn State School of Theater in State College, Pennsylvania; Amy Peter, props master at the theater school at DePaul University in Chicago, Illinois; Karen Rabe Vance, freelance prop manager and artisan in Houston, Texas, and owner of SD Arts Co. Thanks again for watching. And once again, keep those suggestions for future Spaminars coming. We really want to know what you want to learn about. So prop on, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining, everybody.